Hi everyone. I made a video last week why I decided to switch to M1 MacBook Air 16 GB from 8 GB. I'm going to demonstrate some of the challenges I ran into. So what I have here is I have 42 megapixel raw images. Most of these are like nightscapes with dark skies. I'm going to try and create an HDR from these 10 images, and what you can see is the difference between how long it takes M1 with 16 GB and M1 with 8 GB to process that, create an HDR, um, and then we can look at the way things are processed. My apologies, I'm not very great at making videos. Sorry for the picture in picture thing. But what you can see is the smaller picture. You can see the total RAM that it has is 8 GB. So the smaller picture is 8 GB and the bigger one is 16 GB. And you can already see that I started an HDR flow with 10 raw images. These are exact same images, exact same size. So technically there's no difference. And what would surprise you is the sheer amount of time difference. On 16 gig, you can already see that the HDR has been processed and you can see the preview. It's not converted into an HDR yet, but the preview is available. And on 16 GB, even the preview is not available right now. And the time difference is staggering. Spoiler alert, in many cases, I have seen the time difference is thrice as much. So, for example, if 16 GB is taking around 30 seconds to create an HDR of 10 42 megapixel raw images, 8 GB would take close to 90 seconds. So, in this example that you guys are seeing, 16 GB process 10 image HDR in around 32 seconds, and you will see that very soon, yeah, there it goes. 8 GB version will create an HDR in approximately like 85 or 86 seconds, which is almost thrice as much. The other difference that I notice is when it comes to actually creating the HDR, like when I click on merge, there is not a huge time difference. You can see the images were available almost at the same time. I think there I have seen difference of maybe 1 or 2 seconds in the past. Like 8 GB is a couple of seconds slower, but it's at least not a huge difference. What I'm gonna do is the HDR that you guys were looking at was taken on a 14 mm lens. I know it really should not matter, but I have been seeing some differences between a wide angle lens and something that's not so wide angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a 24 mm lens. I'm going to select another set of 10 images and we are going to create another set of HDR. Very similar test what we did. The only difference is we'll use images from 24 mm lens versus a 14 mm lens. One other thing I wanted to point out is on 16 GB, you can see that Lightroom itself is using close to 20 GB of memory. It's using a huge swap file. Similar thing is happening on 8 GB as well. The size of memory that Lightroom is using is a lot bigger than what the actual physical memory is available. One other thing that I've been noticing is there have been a lot of instances. I don't know if I'll be able to reproduce it or not, but there have been a lot of instances where I tried to create an HDR or a Pano or I tried to stack images. And for some reason, 8 GB would almost seem like it's timing out. I hope I can recreate it right now, but it would just get stuck. It seems like it goes in an endless loop. So, what you're seeing right now is a 24 mm lens images. All are raw, exact same images. I think they all were taken um, 30 seconds apart. So HDR, why I'm saying they're taken 30 seconds apart is because it should be able to create a good HDR. And you can see that On 16 GB, the image or the preview is already available. It took like around 35 seconds in this case, um, and it will take much longer. 14 mm, for some reason, most of the images, HDR images that I have processed, either stitched them into a Pano in Lightroom or Photoshop, created stacks or even HDRs. For some reason, 14 mm lens seems to be a little faster for stacking and creating HDR over 24 mm lens. So in this case, like earlier, I used 10 images, it was 32 seconds. In this case, it's 35, and I've seen that consistently. I've used different sample sizes as well. I used 24 mm 5 images versus 14 mm 5 images. The image size, the size of the image is not that different, probably by a couple of MB here and there at times. But even when I try to make sure that the file size is same, 14 mm lens is usually faster than 24. I don't know if it's just the optimization that Lightroom has done. So if you see again, the results were a lot different. 35 seconds for 16 GB MacBook M1 and 102 for 8 GB. And I know that I'm recording this screen on QuickTime. It's using up some memory. I'm pretty sure the performance will be slightly better if I'm not recording the screen. The other thing is Lightroom is definitely not optimized. So, that's another thing that might improve in future. A couple of other tests that I have ran is if you try and create a time-lapse sequence in QuickTime, um, there are a lot of differences that I have been seeing there as well. Another thing I'm going to do here is open up a time-lapse sequence. I usually use QuickTime because that's so much easy. And in this time-lapse sequence, you can see that I'm approximately opening like 609 images, 2.2, like very roughly, but it's very close to 2 GB. I'm going to create a very basic 1080p in Apple's native format time lapse. So if we look at the render times, again, the big picture is 16 GB and the smaller one is 8 GB. In this case, because QuickTime is Apple's own application and it's definitely tuned for M1, you will not see a huge difference. But there is some difference, and that difference changes as you use different types of image formats. These are all JPEGs. Even if it's 609 images, 2 GB, these are all JPEGs, and it's 1080p and Apple's own codec. And you can see that both of these renders they finished almost at the same time with a difference of around 3 seconds. But this difference becomes noticeable as you use different file formats, different sizes of images. The next test I'm going to do is I'm just going to give it a little more stress. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use around 1072 images, and with those 1072 images it adds up to close to 3 GB of data. Again, 1080p. I'm not going crazy this time. So a 1080p video with 3 GB of images, 1072 files, and if we start them at the same time, you'll again see that there is not a huge difference. 16 GB processor said, um, almost just like 8 GB, but where you can see the difference is the way memory is managed. And you can see in this case that system like the CPU is not even being utilized. It's I would say underutilized for some reason. Now I don't know exactly how Apple has tuned QuickTime, but it's definitely not using a whole lot of CPU for processing this. I don't know if they're using GPU. Memory is definitely used up. It's not as bad as Lightroom, but it's definitely used up. And here with 1072 images, you can see a difference of around 6-7 seconds between the render. Again, not a huge difference, but it's still there. I have been running some tests with different types of files which which can be accepted, and I'm seeing more differences there. I want to run one other test. What I'm going to do is I'm going to combine both of these image sets, around 5 GB and 1680 images, and do a 4K. That's what I'm going to try, and there you can certainly see some difference. So I've been seeing different types of images. So what I meant there is different extensions of images, not necessarily JPEG. You can use some other image formats which QuickTime can process. Image sizes. These are all small images because I tried to create a long time lapse. I took really tiny. I think these are under 12 megapixels of images. As your image size grows, the processing also gets slower. And in the memory management, you can see that Lightroom is still using considerable memory. One thing that you have to give to both of these Macs is how well they run even when you're multitasking. So if you look at Lightroom, it's using a lot more memory than the physical machines even have it. But even after that, even considering that, you can see that a 4K video render while Lightroom is running. So these machines are incredible. If you think about it, just having 8 GB of RAM or 16 GB of RAM and having Lightroom running with 4K render in parallel, I think M1 is doing a phenomenal job. What I'm trying to get to here is for my use case, I think 16 GB is going to be a better option in long run because I still feel that the physical memory is slightly faster than using a swap file. And your memory does not have to write to your hard drive that often. That's part one. Part two is you have one extra GPU core, and the other thing is you have little more physical memory that can be shared with your GPU, considering this is a shared memory. So I think your graphic performance is going to be slightly better, and your overall machine's performance is going to be slightly better. As time passes by, obviously most of the newer applications are going to take up more memory, and it's always good to have 16 GB versus 8 GB. That's just my personal opinion. It works better for my use case. Now you can see both of these computers are neck to neck when it comes to processing or rendering a 4K image. You would not see a huge time difference. Both of them would render 4K almost at the same time, but the difference is still there. By the way, this is a time lapse that I have been trying to process. It's not processed yet, but I still have almost half of the images that I have downloaded and I used it for testing. This is a time lapse sequence from this recent snowstorm or the nor'easter that we had called Gale. 4K is rendered. Again, the time difference between 8 GB and 16 GB was negligible, around 4 or 5 seconds. And I'm pretty sure we all can wait that long. I ran a bunch of other tests with different data sets. I might make a video about that if I get time. But if you have confusion 16 GB versus 8 GB, and if you have similar use cases to what I do, astrophotography, time lapses, etc., and if you want to keep it for long run, 16 GB is the way to go.